Boom. We're live. How you guys doing?
Doing well, thanks. How are you?
Good. Andrew's back, everyone. It's amazing.
Welcome back.
We're glad
I've been
you're here
the whole time. I've been here watching all your guys' videos, and I'm very impressed. And I'm happy to be back.
So when I only saw one set of footprints, that was you carrying me. You were there the whole time.
Exactly.
So we were just catching up a little bit before we went live, but you were talking about Antoine Wilson's Prometheus Rising, and I was saying how you told me about that book probably, I don't know, at least 5 times in past podcasts that we did over the last year or two. And I always have been curious about, how it relates to Peterson, because the way you've spoken about it is almost like it relates to some of the things Peterson talks about.
Yeah, when I first started listening to Peterson, especially Maps of Meaning, I had tried writing comments on his videos or tweeting to him to ask him if he had read Prometheus Rising before, because he had mentioned a couple other books that were Maps of Meaning that were written before he had written it. But and it really Prometheus Rising really fits in with Maps of Meaning, where I'd say Maps of Meaning can really get us to view our life as a story, and where we have to understand what our story is and where it's going to properly navigate life, where Prometheus Rising treats the brain as more of as if it's a computer, but it's very similar. And I've read it at least 10 times, but by reading it again now, each time I read it, it makes more sense for me, and I get more out of it.
Right on, man. That's awesome. And well, I guess we should get right into the meat of this too, because when you told me you had an out-of-body experience, I was like, we got to talk about that on the channel, because that's just such a unique thing that people don't really experience, let alone any alternative experience of the mind in its day-to-day interactions with reality. So would you be able to walk us through what happened and what it means to you and how you got there?
Yeah, so first I call it an out-of-body experience. One thing I've been doing is to try not to label things too much. I used to talk a lot about when I was running the channel and doing videos of my lucid dreaming experiences. And I'm not completely sure. Maybe I know that there's differences between what I experienced this morning and a usual lucid dream. And from what I've been reading of other people's accounts, that's just what they've called an out-of-body experience. So I'll describe the difference a little bit later. But so what happened this morning, I had woke up early, looked at my emails for work, did a little bit of work, and then tried to get some rest again, and was meditating. And I definitely was having some dreams beforehand. But then at one point, I find myself in a building that seemed like a residence. And I heard this voice, not like an audible voice. It was as if it was an inner dialogue, but I wasn't running it. It wasn't as if I felt as if I was choosing the words. And it was sort of this voice telling me that the building I was in was a commune of people who wanted to be communists or socialists, and that they're all living in this building together in this big residence, and that they had this feeling of, they thought it would be a good idea at first, but the people who were staying there were always worried if they would have enough food. It seemed like the place wasn't doing well enough to get in enough food. So it was something that was always in their mind. And they had this overall fear that if they were to do something a bit out of line or complain about the situation, that they'd get kicked out. And they were thinking, oh, then there's probably already someone else lined up to take my spot, so I got to be careful here. So anyways, I keep on going. I'm like running down the stairwell, and always just checking in on each level to see if there's someone in these different rooms. And then so maybe I go down 3 floors and I pop my head into this one room, and finally I see there's someone in their little dorm room lying on a bed. And so I walk in slowly, and it's the guy. He looked like he was in his early 20s, of Asian origin, probably Chinese, not Japanese, not Korean, not Filipino, but probably Chinese guy. And
that's such an Andrew moment right there. I love it.
So I see him lying there, and I get this feeling from him in the way that I look at him and see the expression on his face that he can't see me. He's not interacting with me as if he sees me, but he can just sort of sense that there's a presence in the room, and he seems like a little bit scared. So I try to just calm myself and try talking to him. And I say, like, oh, how long have you been here, living here? He said, oh, about a year. And I said, how's it going? He said, it's not going too well. I sort of regret coming here. And I say, like, why don't you go back to your family or stay with someone? Why do you keep staying here? And he said, oh, a bit of embarrassment. I made this big deal about coming here, and I don't want to look like a fool or give up. It felt like his ego was keeping him there. And the difference that I felt in this compared to what would be a lucid dream was that everything was completely stable and solid. Where in a lucid dream, if you turn your head for 1 second and look back, the scene's going to be different. The person you're talking to is going to be someone else. And I was just staring at him, and it was just as if I'm looking around the room right now. And also the answers he was giving me, it was just a completely normal conversation. Where in a dream or in a lucid dream, if I ask someone a question, usually what they say is cryptic and just doesn't make sense. Wow. And then I start thinking, I wonder how long this is going to last. Because usually, whether it's in a lucid dream or whatever this thing was, there's always this, it doesn't last too long. Sometimes you'll have it where it can seem like it's lasting for 2 hours, but quite often it seems like, I don't know, 15 seconds, 30 seconds. And so I think about asking him, like, where is this? I had a feeling it was somewhere in Canada. And then I look at his t-shirt, and he's wearing a Toronto Blue Jays t-shirt, which is, that's a baseball team. And it says, yeah, Toronto Blue Jays, established 1977. That's the last thing I saw. And then all of a sudden I open my eyes. I'm in my room here. And then I also, a difference is that from a lucid dream or regular dreaming, as you open your eyes, the details fade so quickly, and it's very difficult to remember numbers or names or specific things that were said. But I remembered all of this as if it was an actual memory, as if I experienced it in waking life. And so the first thing I do is I Google Toronto Blue Jays, what was their first year? And of course, it says 1977. The second thought I had was, hey, maybe I just knew this. Maybe somehow it's deep in my unconsciousness. Because if you would have asked me, when did the Blue Jays start? I remember that they won the major league, whatever it is, whatever they get in baseball, I can't remember, in 93 and 94. But I would have just guessed that they started in the mid-'80s. But I've been left with this thinking, like, okay, even if it was just somehow I had heard at one point or read in my life that they started in 1977, it's still gobsmacking. I don't know if that word makes sense, but to just know that it was just such a cool feeling to look it up. And after what I've been going through recently, it didn't surprise me. It just made me go, huh, yeah, that makes sense.
Wow. That's amazing.
Holy. And so, other than learning when the Blue Jays were established, what else did you get out of the experience?
Well, like I said earlier, I'm not trying to, I'm just playing around with this. Who knows if that was all in my mind, if it's on some plane of existence. I'm not putting too much. Oh, sorry, I'm getting some feedback of myself. Sounds better now. I'm not worrying too much about it, whether it's whatever it is. But if it was somehow real, if I was somehow communicating with someone, I was happy to get out this feeling of somehow giving him this impression that it was okay for him to leave and go back to his family, and that he shouldn't just stay there out of ego or pride. And from other books I've been reading about people who have had out of body experiences, that's what they had said, that they eventually get to a point where that's their favorite thing to do, is to go off and help people with whatever issues they're facing.
That's awesome. So your consciousness literally, well, let's just give it the benefit of the doubt and say it's true for a minute, because I do believe it. So you somehow your consciousness leaves your body and gathers information outside of your body, and then you reintegrate that when you come back down. Is that how it works?
Well, one way I've been trying to look at it is that I have an ability a bit better than the average person, where I can tap into this creative realm, whether it's the dreaming world or the shared unconscious, whatever you want to call it. I'm able to go in there, and what I've been working on is developing my memory and ability to bring things back from them. Because I remember from a young age, when I'd get into the state of almost drifting off to sleep, I'd hear fantastic music. It seemed like I was tuning into a radio station of the best music I've ever heard. And that's how I've heard what Beethoven or Mozart could do. They could like just tap right into this and like write it all down and bring it back. I've just never had that ability. I don't know how to express it or turn it into anything. Or same with, I've had experiences where it seems like, I don't know, think of the top movies today and what they're producing with CGI and these incredible battle scenes. Like I've had experiences like that and seen things far greater than that, but at the moment I just don't have an artistic ability to put it down, whether it's in a drawing or to be able to describe it well enough, even just by writing it down.
Right. Wow.
And so why do you think you traveled to that particular place and spoke to that person? Like, did you set any sort of intention of where your mind would go, or did you just let it go somewhere at random?
I just so happened to be there. And I'll describe the process for anyone who's interested. And I think I might have talked about this before when I used to do videos, but so let me just go back from when I was a young child, in that I would have incredible dreams, but occasionally I would have lucid dreams. And then usually when I would have them, I would fly. And the way I would fly back then was more like Wile E. Coyote, having to have the Acme wings and running and jumping and like trying to fly. Where when I got into the ability to become lucid on a regular basis, maybe 6 years ago, I learned to fly more like Superman or Neo in the Matrix. And so I started becoming able to have lucid dreams on a regular basis by, well, the first thing I was doing was just writing down my dreams, because I found there was distinct patterns that were happening, and I was learning things about myself from them. Like I remember one of the first things I learned was that I would be subservient to people who I thought were higher than me in the dominance hierarchy, or who I thought were cooler than me, and people who I thought I was above, I'd find myself being rude to them. And so I just really took note of that and made a conscious effort to stop doing that. And then I found by writing down my dreams, I could remember a lot more of them. And then I started reading a book on lucid dreaming, and it said to do reality checks throughout the day. So at first, I think I was maybe every time I'd go into a room, I'd try to flick the light switch on and off. Because if you do that in a dream, if you go to turn on a light, it won't come on, and that's a signal to you that you're dreaming. But then I came up with my own, which was to look at my thumbprint, because it's so finely detailed that if you do it in a dream, you're just gonna be able to tell by the level of detail on your thumb that you're not dreaming, and then at that point you're lucid and you can do as you please. And I use that quite often, where there's always something holding you back in a lucid dream, where there's still a hint of, wait a minute, like this might still be reality. Because the way you would react if you knew that everyone that's within this, who you're seeing, is just something that I shouldn't say that, not just something, but something that your subconscious is creating, the way you'll act with them is completely different. Like there's certain rules and behavior that I'm going to go by being in waking reality. So the best thing to do is to have a good look at your thumbprint. And so even though sometimes I go, okay, I'm lucid dreaming, and then it's sort of like holding you back, that feeling of what are other people going to do. So it's just a good tool to use. And then so I got away from being able to remember my dreams. I stopped writing them down. I stopped meditating. I would rarely have lucid dreams. And that was due to the amount of cannabis I was consuming. I couldn't keep up the practice. And then I haven't had any whatsoever since, I think, October of last year. So I don't know how many months that is. Where even before I had gotten away from it, but would have it once in a while, maybe, I don't know, once a month, we'll say. But now that I haven't had any at all and gotten back into a meditative process and have started recording my dreams, it's just finally come back. And there's two different types of lucid dreaming. There's one where it's dream induced, where within the dream you realize you're dreaming and then you're lucid. But what I've been finally doing again, and I got to at one point back when I started, was having it from a waking state. So I get into a meditation where my breathing slows down to the point where it almost feels as if I'm not breathing at all. It's very shallow breathing that's done more at my diaphragm, and it gets into a rhythm where you sort of lose sense of yourself, because it's almost as if you're doing it, but it's doing itself, and it goes in this circular motion, and then all my thoughts stop. And then if you stay still, eventually you'll feel your body fall asleep, but you're still aware mentally. And you get in, it feels like you're vibrating, and you'll hear like a gentle whooshing noise. And then so with that, if you try moving your body, like I try rolling or rocking, you'll feel a bit of emotion. And then so I'll roll, and it happened the other night where I just rolled out, and then I was like on the floor, but the floor was wooden, and where I am here, it's a tiled floor, so I knew I was somewhere else. So it's never been a matter of me trying to purposely go to a place. For now, like I will eventually do that, but for now it's been just trying to get into the dream body, or the body of light, or the second body, whatever it's been called by many different people.
It's amazing. You know, speaking of the bodies, yeah, the yogic, one of the yogic, traditional yogic ways of looking at it is the physical body, the astral body, and the causal body. So the technically, and I think there's different sheaths of consciousness that they categorize within that, but those are the three main ones. I think they've changed the name from astral to something else since
Ethereal?
That might be it. Yeah. But it used to be called astral, and the astral would be kind of like the more lucid imaginary realm. And then the causal would be the realm in which you are actually creating your own reality. Actually, I have the book where I learned this right here. It's called Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda, and his lineage, specifically his guru, taught him about those 3 different energy sheaths. But apparently, according to this tradition, when you're in the causal realm, you can create your own universe or your own reality just by thinking. When you're in the astral, you're not so much, you don't have that much control. So it kind of reminded me of what you were saying. Like there's some lucid dreams where you're in that imaginary liminal space, and it's kind of this luminous energy, and you're exploring it, but you're kind of barely conscious. Like you're just realizing it, and then then you go more and more and more. This probably sounds crazy to some people, but I think it's fascinating stuff, and I think that there are some really deep truths to these different stages or levels of energy. Don't you guys?
Well, I've been trying to, like I said earlier, I was trying to be skeptical about it. And as much as I'm of 2 minds, because part of me thinks I should just do all this exploring by myself and not read other books and worry about, oh, is this an astral level, etherical level, is it lucid dreaming? But when I started reading this one lucid dreaming book by, I think his name was Robert Monroe, who he documented hundreds of his experiences, it made the hairs on the back of my neck and on the front of my neck stand up, because the way he was describing this vibrational state that he would get into, and how he at first thought he was dreaming, and he described that he put his hand down on the ground and tried pushing through it, and his hand went through the carpet, and he's touching the hardwood floor, and then he put it through the hardwood floor, and it went through down to the ceiling and then down into water. And he realized, like, oh, okay, I'm obviously not really doing this. So the same way he described, he felt that body, that inner body, whatever it's called. I'm like, oh, like I realized that was doing that same thing myself. No one had taught me the technique. It just sort of naturally came to me and started doing that. So I thought, okay, well, I can read these books and read their experiences, but still try not to give any reality or validity to it. Who knows if there's...
You don't have to overanalyze it.
Yeah. And it also influences me, because he described, I think he was talking about 3 different realms or levels, and one he described that he'd go to, and he'd feel these it was always like usually little boys, I think, that would sort of like see him and attach on to him, like, and he'd be trying to like throw them off. They seemed like little golem type creatures. And then after reading that, like I had that experience the next night. So
So then you have to ask yourself, if you're looking at it from a scientific perspective, you ask yourself, well, how much of that experience was then created by the impression that reading about it made on you, versus how much of it was an organic approach to something totally new? That's such an interesting, because when you have an experience and you just had that experience with no prior notions of what other experiences like that could be like, versus when you have an experience after having, like, for example, sometimes when I'm reading a book, I will start to think in the author's voice if I'm really into the book. So like I go around my day, if I'm reading a good fantasy novel or a good nonfiction book, and I'll hear that narrator's voice in the back of my head, and I'll start thinking in that voice sometimes. And it's kind of like a way of wearing that perspective of reality.
Yeah, so I sent you a lecture by Grant Morrison. I also sent it to Mercury. I think he's seen it before, but Grant Morrison, I'm not sure if he's still active as a comic book artist, but he was a practicing magician, ceremonial magic. And in this one lecture he gave, he described how he had an experience where he met aliens, and he was describing how they were the exact same as how Terence McKenna described them. And I think Terence McKenna described them as transforming machine elves. And then when I hear Joe Rogan talk about his experiences on DMT and all these different people, same thing. So they're having similar experiences of elves. But then when I read Robert Anton Wilson, this type of experience that has been experienced by all different cultures for thousands of years, it seems to be something that some people experience it as aliens or gnomes or elves or little hairy men or what used to be angels. It's something that we can generate either by, some people use hallucinogenic ethnogens, or through meditation, or by doing magic. So it's definitely influenced by what I've been reading. It's almost as if there's a form of intelligence that's trying to somehow communicate with us, and it has to take on a form, and it's like it's going to latch on to something that's familiar with us. Like what else could it be for me to experience other than something that is a shape or form that I could recognize?
That reminds me of hearing Alan Moore talk about one of his experiences with, I'm blanking on the guy's friend. Who was his friend who got him into magic? He also had the last name Moore, although they're unrelated.
I can't remember. Stephen Moore?
Yeah, maybe. But they were doing, they used hallucinogenics. So they took magic mushrooms. And, I think the story was they weren't actually trying to do any actual magic that night. They were just hanging out, took a bunch of shrooms, and were just discussing magic, but not trying to do it. And then they had it was as if the ceiling disappeared and a demon presented itself to them. Was it them encountering Asmodeus? But anyway, he said that as this great face came down towards them, it felt like it was dressing itself in images pulled from their mind. And so perhaps there are things that we tap into. And again, whether those are things within our own subconscious, whether those are things internally or externally, there are things we can connect to that it seems that as we connect to them, they take the garments from our mind that are most appropriate to them. The same way that, like, if you were naked and went into a Goodwill, you'd grab the clothes that feel best to you to put on. That to be seen by us, they have to take on images, and it's like they select from what's in your mind to dress themselves with so they can be seen.
Wow.
Yeah, exactly.
So I've heard it explained the inverse way too, where what's actually changing is your mind. Obviously, it's probably both end, right? Because what an interaction between two different things is, it's always changing each other, right? Like, just by observing something, you're changing it, or vice versa. But one of the things that I was researching for my most recent paper for school is how we can only see 0.035% of the light spectrum. So that's on the whole spectrum of the expression of light, we're in the less than 1 percentile of what we notice. So if that's any indicator of how we experience reality in general, which I am fairly certain it is, and there's a lot of reasons for that, then we know that there's a lot out there that we're just not noticing, whether it be states of consciousness or other entities, energies, expressions of the universe. We don't know. And one of the things that retrains what we're picking up and what we're not picking up is through meditation, through intention, goal setting. Like, if you have a goal to get from point A to point B, and Peterson lays this out in Maps of Meaning, you're going to notice everything that's relevant to you in either getting to point B or keeping you from getting to point B. So in other words, what helps you and what threatens you, that's the way that you're going to perceive your reality. So we've evolved as biological organisms to some extent to only notice what's applicable to us for the purposes of. Go ahead.
So Peterson, I'm sure lots of people watching or listening have seen that gorilla experiment where it's a basketball team and they're passing the basketball back and forth, and you have to count the amount of times that the ball is passed. And so as you're doing that, a gorilla comes right through the middle of them and dances around. So I'm sure most people have seen that. And it can also relate to, say, you get you get a car or whatever new vehicle you get, and whatever brand that is or type that is, you're going to start noticing it so much more. So is it that you're attracting it into your life more, or you were seeing it the same amount before, but now it's just more relevant to you? Well, I use that same experiment, and I've also talked about this before, that you can do that with numbers. And I got this from Robert Anton Wilson's book, Prometheus Rising, where I think it's from the first chapter. The exercise to do is go around looking for a quarter, which to our non-American and Canadian listeners, that would be 25 cents, a coin. Go looking for a coin of whatever value you determine. Go out looking for it, and imagine, but before you go out looking for it, vividly imagine, using all of your senses, that you've found it, what it's like to hold it in your hand, and the feeling that you would have once you found it. And write down how long does it take for you to find it. And then try again after you found that first one, but just try explaining it away by saying that, hey, there's quarters all around me. I'm just bound to eventually find one, and it just so happens that I found it in this amount of time because I was more so looking for it. So there's different ways that we can explain why these things happen. And I've done it recently with numbers. For me, it was 77. I did it months ago or last year, where I purposely look for the number 77, and the amount of times that it would show up, whether in my work or just looking at things on the internet, was astounding. And it seems like the more that you look for it, the more it looks for you. And I also just try to explain it away. Well, it's just, I'm going to be seeing this number anyways. It just so happens that I'm paying more attention to this one and not giving as much relevance to the other double-digit numbers I see. But like, I'd also have it where I'm out for a walk, and not within my actual vision, but within my, I guess, peripheral vision, I'll just turn my head and be staring right at the number.
Right.
So it's like so say you do that with viewing everyone as a friendly, helpful person, and thinking that everyone's that way and that everyone's out to help you. Sure, maybe you're not, who knows? We don't know if we're actually drawing them into our lives, but our ability to look for it, and things that are on the periphery that we didn't really know are there, where our attention's being drawn to it. So in the same way that I'm using that, saying, oh, I can be skeptical about it, or actually believe that as much as I'm looking for these things, they're looking for me, it can be the same within what I'm doing with these lucid dreams or out-of-body experiences. Because I had a lucid dream the other day where, I think I was telling you about this, but at the end of the dream, it was as if this one person presented themselves and said, I'm the architect. I created this entire dream. And then so the first thing I did was I just picked them up and swallowed them head first. I just swallowed the whole body. It was funny. I woke up with this incredibly full feeling that lasted for a while. But the reason why I did it was, like in Buddhism, how they say if you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him. And they say the same thing within practicing magic, that by doing certain things, by certain actions, certain events or certain results will follow, but don't give them any too much meaning. Because when you start getting into these mystical practices, like, how are you going to deal with it? Like, say if, I don't know, you have some vision in normal waking life, it could scare the hell out of you. But if you can get into a state of just going, oh, okay, and just sort of dismiss it, I feel like that's sort of what I have to do, and what I have been doing, including meditation. Like I've had times lying down meditating, I had a vision of someone or something jumping on the mattress in sort of like almost like it was a trampoline, and I just felt my body just like in the bed, like I didn't move at all, but it was just going up and down. I've had times in the middle of meditation, both of my hands, like I lie down just completely flat, and I'll be awoken by both of my hands just falling down. They were like up above my head. I didn't consciously do it, and they just slammed down. And if I took any of this too seriously, it could be, a bit daunting. So I'm having this attitude of being skeptical and expecting these things to happen.
Well, you've always been gifted in the way of experimenting with states of consciousness. And even Jordan Peterson himself, when he talked to you, made it a point to say, look at what you're doing with your lucid dreaming. I mean, he was kind of saying, don't be so hard on yourself. You do have something to be proud of, essentially, or to be confident about, I think is what he was getting at. And
yeah, also not just Peterson, when you had Jason Louv on as well. So with Peterson, somebody who knows a fair amount from the psychological side. But when you had Louv on, and so there's someone who's an expert, and he's talked to all kinds of mystics and magicians. He also pointed out that your lucid dreaming ability is extremely rare. And I know it's something I tell you it all the time as well, but it can be different with a close friend where it doesn't hit the mark as much. But notice that Jason Louv and Peterson both pointed that out to you, that your skills there are exceptionally rare and just fantastically powerful.
Well, yeah, and so where I'm at now is actually I heard I was listening to some clip of Jordan Peterson the other day, and he was talking about following your interests, and that your interests are shining out in front of you for a reason. Jung, I think it was Jung that talked about saying it was potentially your future self was sending messages back to you, giving you a reason to be interested in these things. So where I was before, and I also should say this for anyone listening, I'm working on doing a better updated video, more of a proper goodbye. So I'll explain a lot more on that. But one of the issues I was having when I was going through making vlogs and trying to sort myself out was I didn't exactly know what I wanted to do in the future. And I had this idea that I had to have that set, have like my capstone set of my house that I'm building in life. I have to have that finalized and know what it is before I can lay the foundation. Or now I'm taking it the other way. I want the foundation, I want that, and I just trust that by following my interest, it will eventually lead to something. So
just a quick point on that. One of my mentors talks about there's two types of people. And obviously this is an oversimplification for the sake of illustrating a point. There's wolves and there's eagles. The eagles know where they want to go. They see their destination and they fly straight to it. And the wolves follow their nose. And they follow their nose down one trail, and then they lose the scent, and then they pick up the scent later on. And I've always been more of a wolf person myself.
Huh. I wonder about toucans. The toucan Sam follows his nose.
Right.
Or it made me think of a vulture, also up in the air like the eagle, but rather than relying on sight, the vulture can smell rotting meat from miles and miles and miles away. So they just coast on the thermal waves without expending energy and just wait to pick up the scent.
Yeah, exactly. So anyways, the point is that there's a lot of different ways of approaching navigating life. You can be a type A personality and go through that process, or we couldn't even think of the multitude variables of how you could approach life. But it just sounds to me like part of what you're saying is that you're trusting that if you follow your nose, if you take the next step that feels meaningfully engaging, that things will continue to fall into the right place as you move down that path. Another image that Gary Lester shared with me is it's like you step out onto an invisible platform, and you don't see the platform in front of you on that next step, but somehow when you take the next step, the platform's there. It just appears.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so where I feel this is, like I said, I don't know exactly where it's leading, but I have a general idea, and I have trust in the universe that by walking the path, it's going to take me where I need to be. And actually, to go back to one of your questions before, I don't think I exactly answered it when you were showing that book by Yogananda, which is actually another coincidence, the next book on my list to read. But I've heard him describe, so the way you were describing it, of if you can get into that space and create something there, that you can also create it in this realm, it's that whole as above, so below. And there's a man named Neville Goddard, who I think he was from Barbados, who had described that he would use this technique of vividly imagining something to come true, and that if you really applied that and really believed it and held on to that faith, even though all of your other senses will deny it, that it will happen. And I had used that, and even when I talked to Peterson, I told him how I used that. I didn't name by the guy's name, though. I had given the example of the first time I was a MC at a wedding, and I just vividly imagined after the reception, people coming up to me, shaking my hand and telling me I did a great job. And it happened. I had a few other experiences where that happened. But looking back to that, seeing now the way that he described it and these experiences he had, it seems as if he was doing it and he even said it's in a sleep akin to sleep. And I've also found that even if I'm not completely dreaming, when I'm bordering on sleep, I can use my imagination where whatever I think of, it will appear and I'll be seeing it. Like I used to have auditory and visual hallucinations in that state. It would just come unguided by me. Like I'd hear conversations or just see little scenes. But it can be difficult to actually guide it and try to form it into something. Like if for anyone listening, just try after this, lying down 10 minutes and see if you can vividly imagine a red triangle. Like you'll see how often it's going to shift and change colors and get bigger, smaller. And so I am working with that, but I'm interested in all, like, so the same experience that this guy Neville Goddard experienced, that he experienced, it seems similar to what Paul described, or Paul of the Bible I'm talking about, formerly Saul of Tarsus. But there's been so many different people who have described this experience. That Yogananda guy, people, they can describe it as rising Kundalini, that there's this sort of explosion in the head. So I'm interested in what this is, and I'm interested in Terence McKenna and Alan Watts, Robert Anton Wilson, and magic and tarot cards and lucid dreaming, and I'm just following this all the while where I used to have issues with being able to, I don't say concentrate on work or get tasks done. I'm doing a better job now of being able to just let my working life be my working life, getting those things done, and then spending time pursuing these interests and just trusting that it's going to eventually lead to something.
Wow.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, it is. I was going to share with you, Andrew, that I haven't had nearly as many lucid dreams as you have, but I did start having lucid dreams when I first went away from home when I went for a very long time. I went to Arizona and I lived on this dude ranch, which was kind of a disciplinary thing. But anyways, I was sleeping and I kept trying to wake up and I couldn't wake up, and I was trapped in my body and I couldn't move. Like I was experiencing some sort of sleep paralysis, and I started trying to scream and I couldn't, like sounds wouldn't come out of my mouth. So I kept pushing and pushing. And then eventually it was just like all at once. Rah! I was yelling as loud as I could. And then I like exploded out of bed and I started running, and I'm running out of my room and I'm running out onto the ranch, and I go find a horse and I'm next to the horse and I think I'm awake. Like I literally think it's real. And I get on the horse and I ride away. And then I'm in this, eventually I end up in this park, and like I'm walking through this park with like all these different, like there's like that spider web type of thing that kids are hanging all over. And I'm walking by that, and all of a sudden I get stuck again and I can't move. And I'm like, I'm trying to get out of my body, but I can't. And so like my soul or some sort of energy comes out of my solar plexus, and then my and leaves the old body behind, and then a new body just manifested itself, and I kept on walking. And I had all these strange experiences like that in my dreams. And I think part of the reason why was because I was going through this massive life transition where I'd been uprooted and sent away by my parents, and I was in this kind of a totally new world in the middle of nowhere in the desert. And my mind was just extremely, it was like Play-Doh at the time. So I had all these lucid dreams. It was just such a meaningful experience too. And it felt so, and I always would wake up and feel so, I would feel connected to something magical. I can't explain exactly, you know, the feeling, but I can't explain it to people who haven't had it.
Yeah, one of the benefits that I find from lucid dreaming is just my overall mood and energy for the rest of the day after I have one in the morning. So, and yeah, I know that feeling. And so something that brought up for me is that something that I've realized. So I've had that similar experience where it feels like you're having sleep paralysis, and then you think you've awakened from that, but you're still in a dream. I've had it times where it happened 10 times in a row, where I wake up in bed and go, oh, I can't believe, oh, I thought that I woke up, but it was a dream. And I walked down and walked into the kitchen. I'm like, oh, I've never seen this type of cereal before. And then I realize I'm still dreaming. But that experience of trying to like come out of the body, or like trying to yell out, or trying to do something, what I've realized is that, so like how I described earlier, when it comes to flying, and there's a certain amount of effort you can do, and you're going to get a result from it. I eventually came to realize that it can never be a matter of effort, and that dreams isn't ever a place for effort. It's a place for believing. So I've had the experience a few times where, say, trying to walk through a wall, you can get stuck in it. And that always happens where there's any hint of a doubt that you're not able to do it. And any more, if you get into that position, and the more that you try, just the more you'll get stuck in that position. And something and so there's been things I've been experimenting with in what I'm able to do in lucid dreams, like say just seeing a building and setting it on fire by just willing it to happen, or say I'm flying and I'm trying to come down to the ground. Sometimes the landing can be a bit tough, so the other day I imagined a bridge forming from where I was up in the sky down to the ground, and it will happen. But now, again, what I've recently realized is how powerful words are in dreams. And I can't remember where I read it, but I'll find sometimes in lucid dreams that things can be a bit unclear. It can be very dark. And so I tried just saying clarity, and things will instantly become more clear. And then I also tried that with flying, where it seems like there's a certain limit to how fast you can go. But if I just say go faster, you'll start going faster. And then so I thought, okay, let's see what I can try with this. So there's this Egyptian prayer that I'll try to do daily, like say 4 times a day, depending on where the sun is, just as a way to, it's like a mindfulness exercise to be aware of where the sun is and what time it is. But so anyways, I tried doing it within the stream, and I was on top of this apartment building and looking out at the night sky, and I started saying it, and all of the stars were getting brighter and just more, it was taking on more clarity and beautiful. But I got to a point where I was overcome with so much fear. Like I had that frozen response where it just could not come out of me The same, like if you're in a sleep paralysis and you're trying to yell out, like it just wouldn't come out. And then a few nights ago, I tried it again, and I found myself on what seemed like a floor of a giant building, but there was no rooms. It was just this extended floor with nothing in it really. And so I start doing this prayer, and it's taking on the most intense reds and oranges and yellows, beautiful colors, getting more and more intense. And as I do it, I try to imagine seeing an Egyptian god, and then I see this room start forming as I keep saying it. And then finally, like, these doors open, and some sort of hybrid animal comes out. It was almost like a dragon mixed with a horse and I don't know. And it comes out, and then I same thing happened again. I couldn't say any more words, but I hopped on it and rode off. So I'm at the point where, rather than just trying to believe I graduated from at first using effort to using belief to now speaking things and commanding it with words. And the difference is amazing. Oh, did we lose Mercury?
Nope, I'm here. Or
I'm just leaving space for Merc because I've been yapping away.
it's funny you said that, because I was just about to say that I need to go rock a piss, and I'll be back in a minute. So, why don't you guys talk for a minute? But when I get back, I'd had an idea about giving the audience practical application of what you were talking about with numbers and quarters. So I'll be back in a minute. You guys talk about whatever. But then if you want, Andrew, we can together work out an experiment for people who want to try that while mixing in a bit of a Petersonian twist to it. So I'll be back in a couple minutes. You guys enjoy your chat.
All right, I'm going to be a ADD guy for a second. Did you hear that Paris Cathedral is on fire?
Yeah, I read that earlier this morning, but I didn't really look into it.
So there's videos of it online. Ooh, I got one right here. I'm just going to share it with everyone briefly for anybody who's watching. I'm just being a total distracting person right now, but it's not interesting. It's horrible. So look at that. That's insane. When I was reading about it, apparently they couldn't figure out how the cathedral caught on fire. It's the Notre Dame Cathedral, which sounds like some sort of big time cathedral. I swear I've heard of the Notre Dame Cathedral before, so I don't know if it's like a world.
Yeah, that's where the Hunchback lived. The Hunchback of Notre Dame.
So did you hear about that cathedral on fire, Merc?
No, just I overheard a little of what you were saying. But when I was a teenager, I took a trip to France and visited Notre Dame. That cathedral's gorgeous. The gargoyles are amazing on it.
Okay, so here's a coincidence.
It's gone now.
Synchronicity.
Merc. It's no longer.
Sucks.
Yeah. Griswold Grimm just wrote in and said, "I almost brought up the cathedral burning down when Andrew said he's a dream arsonist."
I'm
so here,
really glad. My two teenage daughters just had a school trip. They went to France. So they just, like a month ago, toured Notre Dame. So I'm glad they got to see it before that happened.
Yeah. Well, here, Merc, what you were just asking about before you had to go rock was so I'll tie in to that with this, in that, so I've been having so many synchronicities or coincidences recently, and one is with that. Last night I watched a video by Kenny Hotz, who's a Canadian. He had a show called Kenny versus Spenny back in the 2000s, I think. So I came across this video of his where he was visiting France, and he was visiting Notre Dame in the video. And then this happens today. So I've been having so many coincidences or synchronicities, and similar to how I was talking about the numbers, is that it really does seem like the more you pay attention to them or the more you look for them, the more they look for you. So anyone can try as an experiment. Just, I'd say at first, try with something that doesn't have any meaning to you, just something silly, whether it's looking for whatever coin. Just imagine that it's going to happen and see how often you can make it happen. Or for me, I did it with a number, because you're guaranteed to see numbers throughout the day. So just pick a 2-digit number and write down how many times you see it, and see if that's going to continue, and see if it's going to increase. And then eventually, as you play around with that, you can graduate it to using that mindset. So say you're going to a party, try playing around with the mindset. Everything I'm going to say is interesting. Everyone's going to be interested in me and want to talk to me. I'm going to be the life of the party. It doesn't have to be a party, just a social interaction. And then if you're brave, try it the other way around. Go to a party thinking, I'm unattractive. No one wants to talk to me. I'm boring. No one's really going to want me there. And just see, by you holding on to that mindset, how differently everyone interacts with you. And then it can be up to you to play around with those type of experiments. Make them as interesting as you want to.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I'm going to mix into that, a little bit more of a Peterson element, and I'm going to offer a experiment for people who both want to just play with this, but also want to spread that small ripple of good. So first of all, most people watching this are very familiar with Peterson. You work yourself out first, but then the idea is that maybe you can start helping others. And I think we all want the world to tip towards the good here. And so as an experiment, instead of just choosing a number or choosing a coin, in particular, if anyone's listening to this who's lonely, that's a very common affliction right now. This could both help you with your loneliness and spread some good in the world. So everything Andrew just said about keeping track of when you see it, but instead of it being a quarter or a number, decide that you are going to watch for every opportunity to help somebody. Now, again, staying Petersonian here, I'm not talking about going and telling people what changes they need to make or any of that. I'm talking about helping others in the way they define help. So set the intention of, I want to see if magic works, especially if you're lonely. A great way to feel more connection is to help people. Or the way Peterson talks about one woman he met at a mental institution who just had the most horrible life she was suffering through, and still she showed up to try to take people institutionalized out for a walk. So set the intention of, I want to see how many people I can help, and then spend your day watching for the opportunity, and whether that's, and see what you start noticing. And you may find that you go out to stand on the beach, and because you've created this habit, you think to yourself, even like alone on a beach, is there an opportunity to help someone here? Well, shit, there's broken glass right there, and there's something else right there. I can clean that up and help somebody. Or you might find that as you're walking down the street, you'll just start noticing, shit, that old lady is struggling to get the door open with her arms full of groceries. Maybe you can open a door. Maybe somebody drops something and you can say, hey, excuse me, sir, you dropped your wallet. And if you start with that, and if I'm confident that that everything Andrew says does work, that it'll start building. How much just positive things can you put out into the world? And so
Beautiful.
to use that as an experiment and to keep track of how many opportunities did I have to help someone today, even if it's as small as holding open a door or asking a bus driver not to pull away yet because you see someone running to the station. And I think perhaps if you use that as the experiment, not only will you get the fun of seeing whether it works, but you will be, as you're doing it, you will be spreading small amounts of good into the world and possibly making connections with people that you will find meaningful and spiritually satisfying.
That's awesome.
Another one that Peterson has recommended himself is in cleaning your room. and not just the act of tidying things up, but the actual process of looking at your room, a certain room in a house, and saying, what's the purpose of this room? And allowing that lens or way of viewing it to bring up things for you, to get you to shift and change things around. That, I hope I'm explaining that the right way. And I feel like people who, you hear it so often from people who criticize Peterson. I see it in comments. It's like, what, all these idiots need to be told to clean your room? Like, isn't that obvious? And like, they'll make fun of Peterson. They'll be like, wash your penis, buckos, like by saying that it's something that's so obvious that you should already be doing. But to a lot of people, it's not obvious, and it wasn't obvious to me. And maybe again, they'll say, well, like there's all these, oh, we're worried, like, you know, there's so many things that are happening in society, there's global warming, and yet we should worry first about cleaning our room. Well, it's more than that. Like if you go into a hoarder's house or someone who just has a, you know, it's disgusting, there's things all over. I think Peterson would say, what's the difference between that person's mind and their house? It's the same thing. It's completely disorganized. And so I certainly just found that in my life, that it wasn't obvious to me. I was thinking of all of these different problems of things that I had to do. Meanwhile, my room was just a complete mess. I'd clean it up, I don't know, like once a month, and it would feel nice. I'd feel better. In a few days, it would just go back to how it was. So by starting there first, by just starting with one room and then moving out to your house, you'll become more organized and more clear in your thinking. And by using that lens and perception, by thinking, I've gone on to moving it where I'm still not the best at following a schedule. I'm better than what I was. But what I found better for me is by using that frame of mind and thinking, what do I need to do today? What's the most important thing? And then my mind will just come forward. If I ask the question and in genuine and wanting to hear an answer and following it, your mind just knows what's the best thing for you to do.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing all that. I was just going to add, there's a couple of things. One is, so there's the tangible, concrete cleaning your room. And then there's everything that cleaning your room symbolizes as a meta truth. So when Peterson says clean your room, he's talking on multiple levels of analysis, not just physically. Physically is where it starts, but the implications of living that philosophy of what can I do right in front of me are endless. What is it? I mean, you can apply that to your mental life. You can apply that to your spiritual life. You can apply that to your relationships. I mean, so anybody who's the criticisms you're talking about, those criticisms are, they haven't thought, in my opinion, they haven't been well thought through. The other thing I was going to talk about in regards to earlier, and this adds on to Mercury's assignment or invitation, I suppose, because we're not in a classroom here. And Mercury's assignment. All right, class, go do your homework. But when I was talking about the light spectrum earlier, I was one of the things I want to add to that. There's a part of your brain called the reticular activating system, and it's located in your brainstem. And it simply just, one of the things it does is filters out what's relevant to your states of consciousness. What do you need to be conscious of, and what's irrelevant? And so it's the same thing we were talking about with Peterson's maps of meaning, where if you have a goal, you're going to notice the things that are helping you get towards that goal, or the things that are keeping you away from that goal. So if you change your orientation, like Peterson says, if you shift what you're aiming towards, your actual whole landscape of perceptual reality changes, because your brain is going to start assimilating and accommodating different information. Now, the whole conversation that we also talked about whether or not that information is simultaneously seeking us out while we're seeking it out, I don't have any scientific validation for that. I tend to believe those things because I have more of a mystical bent. But at base, we know that the brain is picking up different information. So anytime that you, like with you, Andrew, you're deciding, my goal is I want to reach different states of consciousness through lucid dreaming, through meditation, and I want to experiment with this world. So therefore, your your landscape of reality is shifting. What you notice, what's important to you, what poses as a threat, what poses as a help. So I just think it's fascinating how we literally are living in our own worlds. And yeah, those worlds are intermeshed, like my world and your world intersect. We share some of the same reality, but there's a lot that's very unique to what we've set up. And so anytime we take the time to pre-program, whether it's through a ritual or a ceremony or a visualization or goal setting, we are literally priming the pump of our brain to change our entire life experience. And repetition is what causes that. And the deeper into a trance-like state you can go, the more that reality is going to shift. There's this book called Why God Won't Go Away. And they talk about when you go into that trance state, you're in a state of hyperarousal and hypoarousal. So your nervous system is literally jacked up and calming down at the same time. It creates this weird symbiotic state of consciousness where you're now suddenly in a trance. And that state is extremely beneficial for changing the neuroplasticity of your brain. So anyways, my long-winded rant is basically just to say that regardless of whatever our spiritual beliefs are, there's some real validation for all this stuff we're talking about, in my opinion.
Yeah,
okay,
and regardless, I was just going to say, regardless of whether it's real or not, phenomenologically, this shit is real. So if someone listens to Andrew and thinks like, this all just sounds like bullshit, don't even worry about is any of this outside or inside of him. Just know that phenomenologically, this can be experienced. And regardless of anything beyond that, that can be powerful and transformative.
So I'm trying to tie a few things here together. One part of it, when I like how we were saying earlier that if you can generate something, a scene within this lucid, whether it's lucid dreaming or intense visualization, that if you can make it as real as possible there and set a belief to it, you know, whether you call that manifesting or magic, and then thinking that it will then also come true in this reality or in this waking world. Or I think that you could also view it as, imagine a family that's just barely making ends meet, that so much of their thinking, they're constantly just generating or boosting from their mind 24/7 that I don't have enough money, I don't have enough money, I don't think we're going to make it. If you could just release that and envision a scene where it's fine and it's set, that by letting go of that, you're in a different brain state and you're going to be seeing things differently and you're going to be acting differently. So whether you think it's mystical or magical, or if you're just changing the view, who knows? It could be all of those things.
Yeah, exactly.
Beautiful. And then also, if you talk about neuroplasticity, they've shown that there's not really a difference between vividly imagining in your mind, say learning the piano. If you just really feel it and imagine it and think of yourself hitting the keys, that you can learn at the same rate as someone who's really doing it. So if you're, I think of
physical exercise too. If you meditate on lifting weights, your body will actually respond as though you've lifted weights.
But also with belief. So say you're doing box jumps, you're trying to jump to a certain height. I've found in my experience that if you start out with something small that you know you can do, it's you know, if you're jumping a foot, you just know you can do it. You jump up, there's no hesitation. As it gradually gets higher, there's a level of disbelief, and you think, oh, I don't think I can do it, and I might fall down. So there's a hesitation when you go to do it. Eventually, once you finally got on it and you jump to your highest height, the next time you do it, because you know that you've already done it, it's just no problem at all. It's just you just hop on it and you go, oh, I can't believe I thought that was difficult. So I think that's another part of it in using these beliefs, whether it's visioning it and just imagining one scene that would imply that your desire is fulfilled, whether it's that, that's generating that belief so that you can then act it out. I think that's also what sigils are. I talked about before doing sigils. If there's something that you desire, that would mean to your brain that you don't have it and you don't believe in it yet, that it's not possible. So by sort of outsourcing that, by condensing it and using words, like we were saying, we know how powerful words are, and having a belief in that process, that by doing it and letting it go, it's somehow, that's another way of just shifting your belief and saying, yep, okay, it's done. Whether it's a placebo effect or all, we can view it from all these different things. All I know is that it works.
Yeah, I agree. Man, you've made a ton of progress since you left us with this channel. I'm really glad to see how well you're doing with your meditation and your dreaming and your sorting yourself out. It's fun to watch.
Thanks, Ryan. It's fun to watch you too.
Cool.
I watch you even when you don't know it. That's really
You watch us in our sleep.
I had a feeling somebody's been watching me. Wow. You ever have that feeling when you're not all alone in the bathroom?
Yeah.
I've been getting that feeling a lot lately.
Well, you didn't know.
Well, okay, it looks like we're wrapping it up here, but one last thing I'll say is that, so on one of those nights when I was having a lucid dream and then one where it really felt like, even before I was reading about out of body experiences, I started to think like it feels like it's more than just dreaming, because I used to think all of these people I'm interacting with in this landscape, in this dreaming landscape, I'd think, oh, they're just figures of my imagination. So, and I would treat them like that. Where I started to think, so in one dream where I was lighting this building on fire, this guy comes running out. He's like, what are you doing? He's like, this isn't just a dream. Like, and like I was like, dude, we will find you. And then I was like, whoa. And so I started to take on the attitude of thinking, maybe it's like a shared space. I shouldn't just think that they're just figments of my imagination. And then it started having an effect when I get there. Like in one, I just found myself in a supermarket and was trying to ask this girl where the oatmeal was, and she couldn't quite understand me. But then in that other one I described where I was doing prayer, and it just got a little too intense and somewhat scary. And then I woke up, as I'm now in my 30s, I have to take multiple urinations throughout the night. And so I got up to go to the washroom, and I could just feel like, I felt like there was almost a presence in the washroom. And so that's why I've been trying to do this. I can just be skeptical about it and not give it any too much meaning. And because if you get too paranoid and too stuck in a frame of trying to believe in what something is, then I think that's where people get into some dangerous territory and can lose their sanity. So I feel sane.
Being too certain about what you're experiencing can then cause you to filter all the information to confirm that. Whereas if you keep a more open mind and you don't define too tightly, then you're more likely to see with an open mind new information. You're more likely to learn when you don't feel like you know everything. And sometimes that's the problem with defining something too early or too strictly is, like Ryan was saying about how our brain filters all of reality around us. It's based on those definitions we set. And so the way you're approaching it at the moment, I think, is fantastic for actual exploration and sort of research into what is genuinely there. Your open-mindedness will serve you well on that.
Well, yeah. That's why I got so much out of reading Robert Anton Wilson, because he described all of the experiences he had when he was going down this road back in the 60s or 70s in his book, Cosmic Trigger. So, and he experimented with different lens. Like he'd think, I'm channeling an alien intelligence from the star system Sirius, or he'd think, oh no, it's an ancient Chinese sage, or then he'd think, oh, it's a puka, which is a mystical rabbit from Ireland. So he never got attached to any one thing. So if for anyone out there is listening and is interested in like pursuing these things, I'd highly recommend reading Cosmic Trigger.
Merc, what you just said real quick before we wrap up reminded me of when I'm in a depressed state of mind, I don't pick up positivity from other, like you could tell me like, hey man, you're awesome. Like you're the best. Like I love you so much. You're just great. And it would just like, I wouldn't even notice it because I'm so focused on all the other shit. And if you told me that I screwed something up, like, hey man, you didn't edit that video right, I would turn that to even more shit. I would make that into a big, oh, Mercury hates me. So it's just so interesting how we filter our perception even down to the level of our emotional states.
Yeah, and that emotional state, not only will it filter out everything in the now, and like I've noticed this a lot with other people that I've interacted with, in a certain emotional state, they can't hear certain compliments.
Exactly.
And it's like it's like the invisible gorilla. That part just doesn't sink in. They just hear what I said after and before. But also, it will filter all your memories. When you're in that state, every memory you have will be about being miserable. So it filters your access to all of that as well.
Yeah. I'm going to come back
Can I say one last thing?
Go ahead.
So analogy it makes me think of, I can't remember it exactly, but I'll try to get through it here, is that there was a man leading his horses from point A to point B. He's taking them on a journey, and he had 12 of them overall. So he's riding one, and partway through the journey, he wants to stop and check and make sure that he has all 12 of them. And he keeps counting them all, and he can only count to 11. So he's like, hang on, okay, I'll hop off my horse here and count again. And he counts 12, and he goes, okay, good. Gets back on, continues. Eventually wants to stop, count again. Same thing happens. He goes, okay, let me hop off. Because first he counted 11, then he counts 12. And he realizes, like, oh, every time I'm on my horse, I can't count all 12. So what he does is he goes, oh, here's the solution. And he picks up the horse, and he carries it on his back so that every time he's going to be able to count all 12. And it's sort of like that horse that we're on it's like the brain that we're riding. Like we always look for something outside of us, not seeing that we're the one generating all the good and the bad and the way that we're viewing things, and that we try to look for something outside of us. We try to carry that horse on our back rather than just realizing that we're on it and we don't have to look for it and have it counted.
Wow. Beautiful note to end it on. Anything else from you, Mark?
There were a couple things that we talked about earlier I could add to, but I don't know how long we've been on. So we could either wrap up now and bring that up some other time, or I did have a bit to say about when you described how limited our perception of the light spectrum is. And
well, we actually have a question in the chat, if you don't mind me just addressing that.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
And then we might be able to get back around to what you just said. What would you guys? It's Orwa Joe. I'm sorry, Joe, if I'm mispronouncing your username. What would you guys recommend when one gets paranoid or scared from these strange kinds of synchronicity? That's a great question, because I know for me, I've had so many kind of eerie synchronistic experiences, and some of them have been incredibly positive, while others have been kind of freaky. And I kind of feel not obliged, but I feel like you're the one to answer that question, Mercury. Just for some reason, I have a feeling.
Okay, so the first thing that jumps into my head is the most powerful magical armor is holding yourself to the highest moral standard. Take a vow of honesty. Take a vow to work towards the good. Define your morality as well as you can and hold yourself to the highest moral standard. Be nothing but forgiving. with magic. Never use that to curse someone. And in fact, if someone curses you, the appropriate response is a blessing to that person. If you can hold yourself to that kind of moral standard, you will find that you feel completely safe no matter what. And maybe I'm going to misquote Socrates here, but whether I'm remembering it or not correctly or not, Socrates, I think like it's in Phaedo or Fido or however you pronounce that, but like going up to his death, he was asked why he wasn't like afraid of being put to death and why he wasn't afraid of what the government there was going to do to him. And he said that like it's just a matter of reality, that the lesser cannot harm the greater. And by lesser and greater there, he wasn't talking about physical power. He was talking about a person of high morality cannot be harmed by a person of low morality. And if you live this long enough, you'll feel it and you'll trust that. It's one of those things that you have to start by taking it on faith, but once you do, it will prove itself to you. And the lesser cannot harm the greater, which means that even if the lesser were to strike him dead, like to kill Socrates, they still are not harming Socrates. They're unable to. And so you suddenly become, you're not afraid of a demon attacking you because you know it can't do anything to you that actually harms you. The eternal part of you, the most important part of you, cannot be harmed. You can be physically harmed, but if you're of high enough morality, that will not corrupt you. And if the damage you take from the world is unable to corrupt you, that means your death is not something to fear. Your death is, at that point, you can look at death as a guardian, as the one who's always got your fucking back. Don't worry, you're gonna die and you're gonna be well treated from that point forward because of your morality. Live a very moral life and you will realize that a demon can't hurt you unless it's for your ultimate good once you are walking the proper path.
Can I add on to that, Ryan?
Of course, man. I'm just chilling.
So everything that Merc said is great for, like you said, that's the best armor or protection. But if you find if you're not at that point and you find yourself the synchronicities adding too much and you get anxious, I've certainly had that, especially with cannabis or mushrooms, is that especially on cannabis, all these synchronicities were just piling up in such a way that I thought, oh, it's the end of the world, or I'm in the Truman Show, or all these different things. And what I eventually learned to do was play it through and challenge the feelings and say, okay, is this really happening? Are all these synchronicities real? Like, show me then. Like, or I just try to like grab onto one thing that's real. Like, I'd have all these synchronicities leading up and I'd think that all of my family and friends were just going to, like, I don't know, burst through into the room. But then I'd go, wait a minute, I'm in Ontario. My dad's in British Columbia. Like, I know he's there. Like if this thing's really going to happen, then like show, because you can just feel that it's all happening in your mind. And it's just a feeling of something going to happen. But if you can play with it, because I went in and out of it so many times that the next time it happened, I kind of took it on in a fun way and used it as a thought experiment and thought like, okay, like what's the ultimate end of what all this could lead to if these things are really true?
Yeah, and I'm glad you continued from there because you're right. I took that just right from the top. So like further down when you're not at that point. Also, if things are beginning to get mystical for you or synchronicities are piling up, reach out to something good for support. Notice like what you're realizing here is there's more to reality than you're used to. And so if you're a Christian, develop a really good relationship with Christ, ask for his protection. Saint Michael is one who seems very universally accessible to Christians or not. Go to, if you have any spiritual tradition, If you have a local church or any sort of support, go for support. You can work with making yourself a protective talisman, and even like you can combine that with Christianity. Like make your own little cross in a private ritual with Christ, asking for protection. And there's nothing wrong with having a security blanket when times are tough, even if all it does is makes you feel better. But yeah, if this shit's real, then yeah, the good's out there. So you've got lots of invisible support all around you.
There's also a developmental line of morality that we all face on one level or another, and that is, to what extent does what's moral come from the outside world of a storyline that's propagated by society versus the conscience? And I tend to believe that those societal morality structures are there as a failsafe for us to feel like we have some sort of external pressure imposed upon us to act in a way that would be harmonious. But my deeper instinct in life tells me that the real morality comes from within, and that there's a sense of inner truth, or you can depend on a voice from within you that can tell you, like, am I doing the right thing? Am I on the right path? Have I made the right choice? Blah, on and on and on and on. And I've just found that the more that I practice using that muscle of intuitive morality, the more that I don't need to rely so much on the external structures. Not that there's anything wrong with the external structures. They're there for a reason. They're wonderful. I'm not disputing that. All I'm saying is that the next level of development for me is to push that edge of, like, how much can I really lean in on my own inner feelings and really develop that sense of spiritual independence versus how much do I need to lean back on others? And that's kind of a push and pull that I'm playing with in my life right now.
Yeah, and that's somewhere that Peterson and Harris converge. They have both found that inner sense. They both found exactly what you're talking about. And I think that is perhaps like general revelation. That is God speaking to all of us, accessible to anybody. Is that inner voice? And you can see that even though Sam Harris doesn't want to have anything to do with any God nonsense, he still has found that inner voice. He's just defined it as something different. And Peterson as well has found that inner voice, and you can see that neither of those men are relying on outside structures to tell them what's right. In fact, like, Peterson's basically, as much as everyone's talking about him defending the patriarchy and the system, he's made it clear that he's just an anarchist whose morality lines up with the government. He doesn't follow laws because they're laws. He's made, like, when Bill C-16 came out, that showed that to him, that inner voice outranks the government. And so the only difference between him and another anarchist who is breaking more laws is the other anarchist either doesn't feel they're moral or is an immoral anarchist, and therefore is a problem. But when you look at most of the great minds, when it comes down to it, they don't do it as to whether or not it's legal at all. No. They do it as whether or not it's right.
Yeah, it's deeply driven from within. And that's something that everybody gets to test in their life to their own. Like, some people are just more dependent on communal guidelines, and that there's nothing wrong with that. But there's also people who are super called to become strongly independent, visionary types that have to constantly push the edge of the envelope in that regard. So I think that's a beautiful distinction to make. And also, it's beautiful to take the value away from it. If you're somebody who doesn't have such a strong individual sense of self and morality, there's nothing wrong with that. Then you could just ask yourself the question, is that what I want? Do I want to develop that more or not? And either way, you're not necessarily doing anything right or wrong. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, and that could connect to a certain degree to, I think, was it Jonathan Haidt, who was pointing out, like, the different morals people had on the left and the right. and that one thing that we don't seem to understand about each other is that the personality type that tends to be conservative, those people have a natural sense that obeying authority is a virtue, whereas people on the left don't feel that is a virtue whatsoever. And you can see that very much in society, those two voices, like the anonymous type crowd, like the Occupy, the V for Vendetta spirit of, and again, you need both. It's like Peterson says, we need to learn how to snake depending how the territory moves. But there's just the personality type for whom, to them, the highest morality is to find that inner voice and to do what's right no matter what authority says. But then it seems that there are people, and this is something I didn't used to understand. I was starting to understand more that other type of personality on my own, but then hearing Jonathan Haidt go over it. Yeah, it seems that there is a type of personality for whom one of their virtues, like, so that inner voice tells them that obeying authority is a virtue. And if we're in the territory where the system does have all the right rules, that's great. Like, that will progress. And perhaps those are also, because like all of us are very free thinkers. We're trying to find our own lives. But then there's also that personality type that joins the army, not despite the fact they tell you what to do, but who love it. I've heard people say that what they love about the army is, yeah, they cut your hair, they give you your clothes, they tell you exactly how to do everything. You know every detail of how it's supposed to be done. They tell you what to do, when to do it. And like, that is the most comfortable thing for them. And so I think there are perhaps people who are driven to do the best they can with the morality they've learned, and that their inner morality is more basic. But like, they will still have the inner feeling not to lie, not to kill, all the basics, but they maybe don't have the depth that Peterson and Sam Harrison we do with it. And that could just be a personality difference.
Yeah, morality is an interesting ball of wax to play with, because you start looking at, are morals universal or not, and then you start comparing different cultures and the moral systems they've come up with, different personalities, and you start to get some very interesting discrepancies. But I just want to read a comment here. Backcountry YYC says, I feel super, says Andrew, look at that jawline, looking lean AF. Feel super good for you, man. You work super hard, and you were and are committed as fuck. So that's a nice little compliment for you, Andrew.
Thanks, man. I've been doing some jaw exercise called music. Thank you. Thanks, though.
I've actually haven't heard that compliment on our chat yet. Nobody's said yet to either of us, look at that jawline. So you're bringing something unique to the channel today.
Yeah.
Anyways, I kind of want to get going, to be honest, if that's okay with both of you.
Yeah.
Nice talking with you guys.
Yeah, it really was. Andrew, anytime you want to come on, man, please. I know you've got a lot going on and you're busy, but we'd love to have you.
Sure. I'll be there.
Okay, sweet. All right,
guys.
everyone.
Bye.